It was a rainy evening in late autumn when Hampson Reed entered La Maison de Belle, a luxurious restaurant known for its exclusivity. Nestled in the heart of the city, its golden chandeliers and polished marble floors served as a reminder of how far some people would go to keep up appearances. Hampson, however, was never interested in such opulence. With his disheveled hair, a casual leather jacket, and faded jeans, he was clearly out of place among the well-dressed diners. As he entered the restaurant, a soft murmur spread across the room. He was used to being looked at in this way, like an outsider. But in that moment, Hampson simply wanted a quiet meal, away from the public eye, away from the expectations of his family. His father, Charles Reed, the CEO of Reed Industries, had always kept him away from the spotlight, pushing him to lead a life out of the media's reach. Despite being the heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire, Hampson had rejected the idea of a life defined by luxury. The hostess, a young woman with a forced smile, sized him up from head to toe before speaking in a voice that was a touch too loud. "I'm afraid we don't have any available tables right now. Perhaps you'd like to try elsewhere." Hampson glanced around at the bustling restaurant, the golden chandeliers reflecting off the polished floors. There were empty seats, but it was clear she had already judged him based on his appearance. Not wanting to make a scene, he quietly told her no problem. "I'll go somewhere else." But just as he turned to leave, Karen Phillips, the manager, caught sight of him. Her sharp eyes immediately picked up on the perceived mismatch of the young man in such an elegant establishment. He looked rough around the edges, out of place among the well-groomed patrons of La Maison de Belle. Karen walked briskly toward him, her heels clicking on the floor. Her gaze flicked briefly to the hostess, who nodded nervously before slipping away. Karen was known for her no-nonsense attitude and had built her career by adhering strictly to the restaurant's high standards of exclusivity. No one, she thought, should ever appear out of line. "You must leave," Karen said, her voice firm, but not without an air of authority. "You're scaring our guests." Hampson blinked, taken aback by her abruptness. "I'm just looking for a table," he replied softly. "Not here, I'm afraid," Karen continued, her eyes scanning him once more as if trying to detect some hidden threat. "Your appearance is unsettling for our guests. They expect a certain atmosphere here." She motioned toward the opulent interior of the restaurant, her eyes narrowing slightly. Confused and now insulted, Hampson stood up straight. He had never experienced anything like this before. "I wasn't planning on causing any trouble," he muttered, his voice steady, but his pride hurt. He turned and left, feeling the eyes of the restaurant staff follow him as he walked out into the cold rain. The night after the incident, Hampson sat in his small, sparsely decorated apartment on the outskirts of the city. He couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that gnawed at him. How could someone judge him so harshly, so quickly, without even knowing who he was? The next morning, as the storm clouds cleared, Hampson's thoughts were interrupted by a call from his father. Charles Reed, ever the businessman, rarely showed emotion, but there was a certain edge in his voice. "I heard what happened last night," his father said, a slight tension in his tone. "I'll make sure they understand what they've done." Hampson's first instinct was to dismiss the matter as trivial, but something about his father's words stirred unease. "I don't want you to make a fuss over this, Dad," Hampson replied. "It's not a big deal." But Charles was insistent. "You don't know who you are in this world, Hampson. You're not just anyone. You carry the name of Reed. They crossed the line. I'm going to handle it." It wasn't long before the owner of the restaurant, Mr. Gaston Dupont, reached out to Charles Reed. The apology was swift, formal, and full of regret. But something about the situation struck Hampson. Why was his father so quick to act, to take such offense over a simple misunderstanding? Hampson knew his father was an influential man in the corporate world. He understood how the name Reed carried weight, but still, he hadn't expected his father to use that power on his behalf. Later that week, as Hampson walked to his car, he was greeted by a message from an unknown number. It was from Karen Phillips, the manager of the restaurant. She wanted to meet with him. Karen sat in a small cafe, nervously stirring her coffee as she waited for Hampson to arrive. She had been through a whirlwind in the past few days. After the incident at the restaurant, she had been summoned by her boss, who was furious with her decision to eject the guest who turned out to be Hampson Reed, the heir to Reed Industries. The owner of the restaurant had been informed of Hampson's identity, and it wasn't long before he realized that the Reed family's influence in the city could have secured lucrative business partnerships for La Maison de Belle. Karen's decision had cost the restaurant not only an important guest, but a potential fortune. As Hampson entered the cafe, he immediately recognized her. Karen stood up, her posture stiff and apologetic. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice sincere. "What happened was wrong. I misjudged you, and for that, I am truly sorry." Hampson sat down across from her, his eyes not betraying the hurt he had felt. "You don't need to apologize," he said. "I understand how things work around here. People like me don't fit in." Karen shook her head. "That's not the point. It's not about who fits in and who doesn't. It's about how quickly I judged you based on your appearance, without knowing anything about you." Hampson studied her, and for the first time, he saw a hint of regret in her eyes. "I can't change how you see me," he said quietly. "But it's your actions that speak louder than anything. You didn't even give me a chance." Karen felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had let her pride cloud her judgment, all because of her desire to uphold the restaurant's image. She had let Hampson leave without ever considering that his appearance might have nothing to do with who he was. Days later, Karen found herself at a crossroads. The pressure from the restaurant's management had become unbearable. She had already received a formal warning for her actions, but when the Reed family made it clear that their association with the restaurant was now severed, Karen was let go. She left La Maison de Belle that day, the sting of the loss sharp and bitter. For years, she had worked her way up from a simple waitress to the manager, only to lose everything in a moment of misguided judgment. She reflected on her arrogance, her obsession with status, and how, in the blink of an eye, she had destroyed everything. But even as she packed her things and prepared to leave, a surprising letter arrived from Hampson. It wasn't a letter of revenge or bitterness. It was a simple note, written in his calm, introspective style. "I understand what you did. I don't hold it against you. I hope you find the peace you've been seeking. You made a mistake, but that doesn't define who you are." Months passed, and Karen's life took on a quieter, humbler tone. She found work at a small, local bistro, and though it was a far cry from the world of fine dining she had known, she found herself genuinely content. She learned to value authenticity over appearances, and to her surprise, she began to build relationships with people who saw her for who she truly was, not just her position. One day, while walking through the city's park, Karen spotted Hampson sitting alone on a bench, his usual casual attire a stark contrast to the formal setting in which they had met. She hesitated, then approached him. Hampson looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Karen, it's good to see you," he said. "I'm glad things are going well." Karen nodded, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Hampson. Your letter, it meant more to me than you know." They talked for hours that afternoon, sharing their stories and discussing how they had both learned from their mistakes. Karen realized that her life had been shaped by the superficiality of her environment, and Hampson had seen through it all, revealing a kindness that surprised her. Though they had started from a place of misunderstanding, Karen and Hampson's encounter became a lesson in growth, humility, and the consequences of first impressions. In a world that often values outward appearances, they both learned the importance of seeing people for who they truly were, beyond the surface. Hampson returned to his life, continuing to live quietly out of the spotlight, but with a newfound understanding of the power of empathy. Karen, meanwhile, moved forward with a deeper appreciation for authenticity and connection, forever changed by the young man she had once wrongly judged.